Or I see some familiar faces here from my past. For those who don't know, I used to work with for the Neponset uh, Watershed Association many moons ago, and now I am a scientist and project manager for Fuss and O'Neill. I work on projects not only in the Neponset watershed, but all of really southern New England. As Carrie mentioned, I was in Connecticut earlier today, do work in Rhode Island. So mainly Massachusetts, Rhode Island and Connecticut communities, but we are southern New England firm, and I do work up in New Hampshire from time to time. So I'm here today to talk to you about our MVP project that we just wrapped up with the town of Foxborough, and Lance is here. And you can direct questions to myself or Lance at the end of the presentation. But we wanted people to get a sense for the project as we wrapped it up, learn about the good, bad, and the ugly from the project. So maybe you can take it and use maybe some of the lessons learned by us or our approach and apply them to your own community. So this project is three prongs, and I'll talk about all three. It was a project born out of some flood resiliency for a particular location in Foxborough at Cocassette Street, where there's a railroad underpass that floods fairly often during small storm events. And then to sort of marry that with a larger town-wide discussion on green infrastructure and how to start incorporating more green infrastructure with a bit of an eye towards that phosphorus control plan that people were talking about earlier. And how does Foxborough look at green infrastructure and incorporate green infrastructure on its own properties moving forward? And then the sort of third leg of our stool for this project was an education and outreach piece to disseminate the results of these two main tasks for the project. So to give everybody an idea of the team that was involved on this project, we had a fairly large steering committee. And for those who are not familiar with the MVP program or Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, that is sort of a mainstay of that program. They want to see participation from more than just a few key champions in town. They want to see engagement with different groups and organizations that do work in town, environmental justice communities to the extent the communities you're working have them. They want to see buy-in from more than just DPW or engineering from the town staff. So just to take a moment to acknowledge all the work. So our steering committee met 5 or 6 times throughout the project to talk about different aspects of the project. We had folks from a bunch of different departments from the town itself, also town residents, Neponset Reservoir Association, and then also Neponset Watershed Association also was part of our steering committee to help guide us along this process and make decisions on what were the best BMPs for Cocassette Street, what were the best BMPs for the town in general. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about sort of the project overview and outcomes for specifically our Cocassette Street rail underpass and how we sort of dealt with the flooding there by using green infrastructure. I'll talk about our green infrastructure master plan, give you a sense for sort of what the deliverables from that and where that task may be going in the future. And I'll talk a little bit about our community engagement, how we used the community engagement to inform our decision-making process and get input from the public, and then talk a little bit about our successes and challenges, but leave enough time at the end here for folks to ask questions. So to start with, for those who are not familiar, I'll start with our Cocassette Street underpass. So this is a map of the location, and the underpass sort of bisects these areas. We have sort of an eastern and western location, excuse me, that we looked to utilize green infrastructure to help solve a flooding problem. We did some pretty extensive modeling on the flooding and the drainage system that is in this area to sort of see where our flooding problems were coming from and how we could use green infrastructure to solve those flooding problems. what we found was we had a little bit of a misalignment of a pipe, but really the bulk of the flooding comes from sort of the western side of the railroad. So everything from the railroad west is the bulk of the water that is piling up sort of right here under, if folks can see my pointer, underneath the railroad underpass. And it is happening during fairly small storms. So according to the modeling and through some photographs we have that Chris Gallagher and Lance had from flooding that happened previously, even storms as small as a half an inch, if the intensity was high enough, if they happened really quickly, they would see flooding at this underpass. And the modeling and those pictures actually lined up really well, scary well when you consider all the variables involved. So then we were tasked with how are we going to solve that flooding, and through the modeling we got a sense for how deep and the duration of that those floodwaters were happening. We looked for places for green infrastructure, and as I mentioned, the bulk of the water contributing to the flooding we found was coming from the western side. So while we had some available space to the east of the underpass, that area wasn't really going to help us when it came to fixing their flooding problem. But we did identify some areas along Pratt Street. Up in the northern part of Pratt Street, there is a playground, the Elegy Hill Playground, where we proposed doing some underground surface and underground infiltration to help alleviate some of the flooding. And then the intersection of Pratt and Cocassette Street was another area where we had some available space in between the competing utilities in that area to do some more underground infiltration. Either one of those systems would have the benefit of eliminating flooding during the water quality event. So a little bit over an inch of rain over 24 hours, they would no longer see flooding. So that was the best we could do using green infrastructure. For storms larger than that, and this is what we've seen in a number of MVP projects, not just in Foxborough, but in other communities, when we're using these green solutions and green infrastructure solutions to solve flooding problems. Water quality event, 1 year, 2 year storm, if you can make a dent on those or eliminate those, that's about the best you can hope for, unless you have a lot of available space near where your flooding problem is, which for the communities in the Neponset watershed is unlikely for most communities, especially as you get closer to Boston. The Dedhams and Boston, even Miltons of the world, are much more densely developed at this point and probably don't have as much available space to do any to actually eliminate flooding at a particular location for storms 25, 50, 100-year storm events or larger. In this case, we also had a berm, and you can't see it here, but right alongside the railroad tracks on the eastern side, there was a small berm that was installed when this development, Karen's Way, was installed. And through the plan review for looking for opportunities for green infrastructure, we identified this as an opportunity. Through the modeling, it was showing that this berm was actually sort of the limiting factor on our max flood depths for the larger storms. So while we weren't able to eliminate flooding on these larger storms, we are, through the removal of that berm, able to reduce flooding or the maximum flood depth by about a foot or a little bit more for those larger storm events. So really, we're able to sort of get at both ends of the flooding. So the smaller, more flashy events, more frequent events, we're able to eliminate the water quality event, reduce the duration for the 1 and 2 year storms. And then for the larger events, reduce the maximum depth so they aren't having to run detours or even close the road in some instances. For the green infrastructure piece of our project, so we looked at green infrastructure specifically for Cocassette Street, but then we wanted to sort of make the jump and look at the town as a whole. How does Foxborough in the future look to use green infrastructure, not only to prevent flooding in areas, but also to protect water quality of its water resources. They know they wanted to solve that specific flooding problem out at Cocassette Street, but then they had a desire to understand better additional opportunities and how they could incorporate green infrastructure into their everyday operations and how they plan for the town moving forward. And so as part of that task, we looked at opportunities townwide. We looked at using nature-based solutions with a strong emphasis on infiltration, because it's going to be the best for not only eliminating or improving flood capacity in areas, but also improving and protecting water quality in areas. And the output of that task was to identify 10 locations through work with the steering committee to develop conceptual designs. And we have conceptual designs that you can see here laid out across town. Everything from smaller practices like you see at the Council of Aging, where we propose stuff like small rain gardens and rain barrels and some dry wells as more of demonstration projects in a place where you get a lot of through traffic from the public, where they can learn more about green infrastructure and its importance for the town, all the way to larger green infrastructure opportunities like at Payson Roads. Payson Road is a large athletic complex in the town of Foxborough for people who are not familiar, and they have large parking lots, which while are gravel at the moment are compacted and act as impervious surface. So giving them an idea of how through future development they can treat stormwater on this location to not only improve the drainage of the site, protect the fields for playability, and especially in the spring, but also protect water quality. That location, for those who are not familiar, is near Crack Rock Pond and the Neponset Reservoir. Both are impaired waters in the upper reaches of the Neponset. And then sort of a unique area you see on the lower right of these 9 opportunities, Sunrise Road and Twilight Drive. These were areas where we identified, not necessarily, while there are some areas where you could maybe do some infiltration, these were just areas in town where they had exceedingly wide roads as part of previous development dating back to the 60s and 70s and early 80s, where the roads, I want to say the roads in this development are like 35 feet wide with sidewalks on both sides. And here we identified this opportunity and really wanted to highlight it as a way that the towns can meet requirements, especially for phosphorus control plans, by reducing the widths of these residential streets that don't need to be 35 feet wide. You can take credit for all the phosphorus removal, also not having the long-term maintenance burden of green infrastructure. So it is still a green practice and a nature-based solution to reduce widths. And this was one that I thought was of particular import for not only Foxborough, but is probably one of the more transferable locations that communities can look at for their own community and say, hey, do we have any developments like this that have these 30, 35 foot wide streets, sidewalks on both sides? Like, are the sidewalks necessary? Do we need pavement that's 35 feet wide? You know, can we get buses down these roads at 26 feet wide, at 30 feet wide, even reducing 5 feet of impervious surface? When you talk about the annual phosphorus load can add up quite quickly when you're talking about, I think it's actually a couple miles of road in this development. You're only seeing snapshots of a couple different intersections. Couple that with information which is not part of our project, but that Lance could talk about more specifically. They were doing a sidewalk survey, and they're getting feedback from the community that folks are okay with actually removing sidewalks that don't make sense. So we're hoping to see future projects where we can engage the community, maybe through MVP, and engage the actual development where they're looking to do road width reduction and maybe remove sidewalks in part of the development, work with the community on which and the development specifically, and the homeowners in the area, which sidewalks they would be okay with removing, ultimately reducing the the phosphorus load for that community or for that development. And so we married these two main sort of engineering tasks, the Cocassette Street Underpass and the green infrastructure assessment for the master plan for the town, through our community engagement process. And we did that in a number of different ways. So we looked at disseminating our results and draft deliverables and calls to our workshops through their social media channels. So we leveraged the social media channels, not only of the town, but also of the Neponset River Watershed Association, who is a partner on this project, to get the word out for people to attend our workshops and look at our website and deliverables. We had a project website where people could go not only to look at the outcome of the project, but also to interact with and add locations that they thought were good opportunities for green infrastructure, put on there places where they were seeing flooding other than Cocassette Street, which we knew about. And then we used the website sort of as our one-stop shop for everything as part of this project. People could send in information or questions via the email address, which we did receive some. And then at the end of the project, we actually used the website to help prioritize and rank using public input. We put all of our stormwater green infrastructure best management practices up there, and people could vote on which ones they thought were the best opportunities. And so they had information not only on where the practice would be, but what it would cost, what the pollutant removal efficiency would be for that particular practice. As I mentioned, we did some workshops. So, and really the workshops, NEPRA did a lot of the heavy lifting on the workshops. So thank you to them for the work that they did on those. But getting information out on climate resilience, how it relates to Foxborough. They were on Foxborough cable access on a piece that's going to run in perpetuity, talking about not only opportunities specific to Foxborough, but how residents can actually be a part of not only this project, but improvements in climate resilience moving forward. And this is also what this, my presentation here today is also working towards those workshops. And then some press releases, which in the grand scheme of things for our outreach strategy, we did get picked up in the paper. This is probably the lowest hanging fruit in terms of an education and outreach strategy. I think we got a lot more mileage out of the social media channels, the workshops, and specifically the website. Successes and challenges. So I think we were able to do a pretty good job of dealing with flooding at that underpass, which was our goal. It would have been nice sort of on both the success side and the challenge side. We were able to eliminate flooding during the water quality event, which I think is a success. Challenges is still not able to eliminate fully the flooding during the larger storm events, which we would have been like to do, but just through available space, capacity, and overall cost, it wasn't going to be possible for the 1 year, 2 year, and larger storm events to fully eliminate the flooding. We identified multiple locations for green infrastructure. Some the town is already looking to move forward with, I think, which is excellent progress, and obviously looking for opportunities for future grants to maybe do some more implementation in the future. And I think another big takeaway, I mentioned it before from the green infrastructure task, is identified a need in town to reduce road widths in several developments. So taking this idea where we identified one development as sort of a pilot to maybe look to do in the near term, but think about that not only for that development, but as a way the town can help meet some MS4 requirements in the future in not just that development, but maybe 3 or 4 different developments, past developments in the town of Foxborough. And then another one of our challenges, community engagement. So this is one that we had some plans early on to do some stuff with the schools and stuff, and just some of those plans fell through. So from a challenge perspective, I would, for those who are embarking on action grants in the upcoming year or in the future, for your community engagement, have some things in your back pocket to pivot to if your initial community engagement strategies don't look like they're going to pan out. We had to do some, as Carrie could attest, we had to do, and Lance could attest, we had to do some work on the fly to sort of pivot. And I think we did a pretty good job of bringing value to the project and value to Foxborough with the way we pivoted our engagement to incorporate that cable access show, for example. So that was our project in a nutshell. Here's my contact information, but really wanted to leave the rest of the time for folks to ask questions, either specific to this project, ask questions about our successes, challenges, how things went, things that might be transferable to you.
I have one question. When you were talking about some of the developments, are you talking about the new developments or existing developments? I can't hear you.
Okay, so you broke up there for just a quick second, but I think I got the gist of the question. So the question was, if I'm hearing you correctly, was this for past development or for future development?
Right.
Well, the opportunities we identified were for locations from past development. So future development would be dealt with through planning and Concom through the development process. And Foxborough's already working on that through how they, they were already telling us while we were meeting as a steering committee that they are approving road widths not to 35 feet anymore, that it's more the norm for the residential roads.
I keep losing you, I'm sorry.
I hope I'm not being lost for everybody, but that it's more normal for them to approve roads at 26 feet in width. So this is for past development. We identified these opportunities.
That's a tough one.
It is a tough one. And anytime you're dealing with past development, especially residential development, it can be hard working with so many private property owners. But in this instance, that particular neighborhood, both the police chief and the fire chief live in that neighborhood, and they're helping rally sort of the cause for that.
When you're talking about all this, I mean, I'm just thinking out loud. I mean, why not have a handicap situation problem where there's more grass? Streets like in the neighborhood of Rosendale, part of Boston, we have some streets, that have some grass, and of course, the rest of it is cement, whatever. But it has to be big enough, the accessibility can deal with that.
Right. So I think your question is asking, how do you balance ADA requirements with any, road width reduction or reduction of sidewalks? And that absolutely has to come into play. So for a neighborhood of Boston like Roslindale, definitely more challenging to balance that. So for this is probably more appropriate with the more suburban portions of the Neponset watershed, for example, where they have these developments with the wider streets. For places like Roslindale, where it is sort of concrete from sideline to sideline, so to speak. So you got building, sidewalk, street, sidewalk, other building. There we look for opportunities to incorporate green infrastructure. Maybe some of the sidewalks are wider in places, and you can add green infrastructure incorporated into the sidewalk environment. Sometimes you can do curb bump outs. Right. That does come at the cost of reducing parking a lot of times, which I know is a hot button in all those communities where it is sort of sidewalk to sidewalk like that. But so it's a balance.
My question to the other towns, because I really don't even know about is in any new development, in any of these towns, do they demand that there has to be a green infrastructure?
So developments have requirements, state requirements to meet stormwater handbook guidelines. And there's going to be a new handbook coming out soon, and they'll have to meet that. Communities, for those who have updated their regulations to be compliant with MS4, even take it a step further, especially those in the Neponset and Charles who have those phosphorus control plan requirements, requiring that their development regulations, you know, target phosphorus specifically. So yeah, private development does have requirements that they do have to follow. Could they do more? Could they be incentivized to do more? Yes, but that, you know, likely it will end up being community by community and be sort of above and beyond what the minimum requirements would be.
Thank you.
So apologies if I missed this in the presentation, but what was the practice that you went with at the train overpass?
So there we use, and I pulled up our, people still see my screen.
Yeah.
So these are the plans. So here is the park. We had some.
Can't see the plans, Bill. We're looking at the presentation still.
Oh boy.
You may have to like unshare and reshare.
Yeah.
Oh.
How about that?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
So I can get as detailed as folks want. So we have some parking areas you can see where we have pervious pavers. Really the parking here right now is just gravel. People just pull in. This is a fairly small playground that really just local residents use. We're using this corner at the intersection of Community Way and Pratt to really be the bulk of our pre-treatment. We have some additional pre-treatment in terms of some underground separators, swirl separators, but we're trying to do as much of the pre-treatment on the surface as possible to facilitate maintenance requirements from the town to make it easier for them to maintain. And then all of this feeds into an underground system. If folks are familiar, storm tech chambers, or they look like sort of a leach field from a septic system. And this is able to, I want to say it's about 4,000 cubic feet of water it's able to hold. So again, it can get to our water quality event and eliminate flooding. But it doesn't get at the larger storm events. It does reduce their duration. And then the other piece of green infrastructure, again, underground infiltration. There isn't a lot of space along the side of the road to do any of those sort of right-of-way retrofits. So we did have to go underground here. And to the east, while not really positively reducing flooding, we do have a surface practice, which is a fairly inexpensive practice designed at East and Cocassette Street, where they can do an infiltration basin with a more traditional sediment forebay, further reduce the water getting to the underpass. But here we were able to actually use some of this surface area, that available space that was available to do something on the surface, reduce costs. Anytime you go underground, it's a lot more expensive, unfortunately. So those are the practices at Cocassette Street, more specifically.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Bill, has this been built?
Has any of this been built? No, we just finished the design. So the the practices at Cocassette Street, those have much more design. So it's really just concepts for the townwide master plan. The call them concepts for Cocassette Street. Those are actually design plans. And Lance could speak to the appetite for the town to move forward on construction better than me.
All right, because I was going to ask you how that worked 2 Sundays ago.
Nope, not on the ground yet, but we'll let you
All
know
right.
when and if it does get built.
Because 2 Sundays ago, we had that downpour down there.
Did you have to close the road, Lance? Do you have any flooding?
I'm not always keyed into that situation, so I'd have to ask.
Well, thanks so much, Bill. I
Thank
appreciate you
you.
coming here.
I made it.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Bill.